Hello and welcome to the Standard Protocol Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Sutter. Thank you for tuning in to episode number 3 of our podcast here. We are now up and running on SoundCloud, so hopefully that's how you found us. If you found us by means of another avenue, whether it be word of mouth or a friend of the show, whatever the case may be, please feel free to drop us a line and let us know how you stumbled onto our podcast here. The email is standardprotocolpodcast@gmail.com, standardprotocolpodcast@gmail.com. Let us know how you found out about us, and if there are any issues, topics, questions you have for the forum, please feel free to include those in your emails. We will read the emails on air, and we will be more than happy to tackle any tough topics that you want to hear us talk about. So with that, I will push forward into our first topic of the day. The other day I was thinking about this broad brush approach that most of us, whether we're millennials or Gen Zs, tend to take in our lives. And the broad brush approach, as I call it, comes from looking at things in a group manner as opposed to individualized, and painting with somewhat of a broad brush, if that makes sense. I remember noticing this approach very early on in my life when I was in kindergarten. So I would have been 5 years old. This would have been about 1987. For those of you following the show, you know I'm about 40 years old. 1987 kindergarten class. My teacher took an extremely broad brush approach to our class, meaning that if one kid failed, we all failed. There was no individualized approach to dealing with problems or to dealing with individual students. It was a broad brush where if one student misbehaved, the entire class paid for it. And at 5 years old, I remembered looking at that and seeing that as problematic. And as I grew and, became other things in life, I've seen this at different stages of my life, and I've always disagreed with that particular approach. But, going back to my kindergarten class, we always, we had a good class. We had kids that were good-hearted. They were, young, innocent minds at that point, and they tried their best when they came in every day to do the right things. And the vast majority of the class was on the right track. If it was story time, we were sitting on the carpet. If it was, writing time, we were sitting at our desks. But as many classes have, there's always the one kid that has, whether it's a behavioral issue or, maybe he's a product of a difficult environment at home. This kid just didn't care. And I don't know where this kid's at now, so I'll call him Johnny because I don't want to out him in front of everyone. But Johnny was always the kid that was off in the corner doing his own thing, playing with toys when he shouldn't have been, going about his business in his own world. But oftentimes, our entire class would miss out on recess or toy time or the fun stuff because we were being punished for Johnny's behavior, even though the rest of the class's behavior was in line with the expectation. And I always, even at 5 years old, I always looked at that and I went, that doesn't seem right. That doesn't seem fair. Why am I being punished for the behavior of others? Why? How come I'm doing the right things here and the kids around me are doing the right things, but we're being punished for the one kid who's not capable or just doesn't want to do the right things or adhere to the rules? And I always questioned that when I was younger. Now that I'm older, I've seen it in many other areas of my life. When I was in high school, I saw it, whether it, was in school or sports or whatever the case may be, but also in the corporate world. When I grew up, I saw, I remember distinctly when I was hired to work at this company, we were allotted 60 minutes for lunch every day. You had 60 minutes to go out, take your lunch break, grab a meal, decompress, come back in after that and be productive all afternoon. One guy got caught taking 90 minutes as opposed to the 60 that we were allotted. And pretty soon a blanket email went out to the company and everybody got cut down to 45 minutes for lunch. And I remember thinking about that at that time, thinking, okay, why are you punishing me? I'm adhering to the rule. I'm adhering to the company policy of 60 minutes every day. I'm back on time. I'm at my desk working like I should be. One guy is off doing something he shouldn't be, and now you're punishing all of us. And the reality of it is, when companies and management does things like that, they're not actually addressing the behavior that is creating the problem, because the guy that's taking an hour and a half every day, he doesn't care if the new rule is 45 minutes or 60 minutes. He wasn't following the rule to begin with. He's going to take as much time as he wants every day, and nobody's addressing him as an individual. So really, when you put out this new blanket policy shortening everyone's lunch hour, all you're doing is adversely affecting the people that are doing things right. You're not addressing the behavior of the guy that's doing it wrong, because he was doing it wrong before. He's going to continue to do it wrong because you're not addressing that. You're just making life harder for the rest of us. So I've always disagreed with that broad brush approach of trying to rein things in. You have to look at people as individuals and deal with individuals, hold them accountable individually, and address bad behavior individually, and not try to broad brush it or throw out a blanket approach to solving these problems. I often think, I can't help but wonder if that type of mentality where broad brushing is okay doesn't blend over into other areas of our life, and oftentimes maybe that we haven't even thought about or that we haven't even realized yet. Look at the heels of the pandemic here, where, the last few years we were hit with a medical pandemic that very few doctors or medical professionals were ever trained to deal with. And there were a lot of things that doctors and high-level medical professionals got wrong in that scenario, because it wasn't something that we dealt before. It wasn't something that that science had totally proven itself in. It wasn't an area like that. So you had a few doctors that got things wrong, and that's probably understandable given the fact that it was a worldwide pandemic of proportions we'd never seen before. But now you have a lot of people that are questioning the medical industry as a whole, because a few doctors got something wrong. Now everybody's questioning the entire profession and whether or not doctors know what's best and whether or not the science is proven like we once thought it was. And so I think that you see areas where that broad brushing is going on and has really become a way that a lot of young people live by. I also think you see it in politics. You see a few bad political figures out there, or bad actors that are, in it for special interests, or some of them are taking, improper campaign donations and things like that. And now you have a large group of people that feel that politics is broken, and that people that you run for political office don't have their best interest at heart, when the reality of it is there are a lot of politicians out there doing the right things every day and trying to make positive change in their areas. You see it in law enforcement. And if a few officers somewhere do something bad or do something that's portrayed in a negative light, now all of a sudden all cops are bad, and the entire policing industry needs revamped and restructured as a whole. And, I think that broad brush approach has led to a lot of people that they jump to conclusions every time they see something negative. And I also wonder if, while we're on the topic, if that does not fuel some of the racism and bigotry that we see in our society. If someone has a negative interaction with a person of color, do they all of a sudden start painting that entire race as something negative because of the actions of one person, instead of looking at it as an individualized incident with one bad actor and holding that one individual accountable? We're now holding a group of people accountable. And I often wonder if that the way that our previous generation brought us up with that broad brush approach to things, if that hasn't had a bleed over into other areas and some negative connotations in our lives that a lot of us either haven't realized yet or haven't discussed, and maybe maybe there's some work to be done there. So if you have any questions, comments, concerns on that, please feel free to send us an email: standardprotocolpodcast@gmail.com. standardprotocolpodcast@gmail.com. So we appreciate you tuning in. Again, this is our third episode. Please, if you haven't yet, go back and listen to episodes 1 and 2 on SoundCloud. Let us know. Shoot us an email. Let us know how you found out about the podcast. If you're new, if this is your first episode, I'm guessing you probably heard about it by way of word of mouth, or maybe you're a friend of the show. But anyways, please let us know what you think, what we can improve upon, what we can change for future episodes. standardprotocolpodcast@gmail.com. Okay, and the next topic that I wanted to get into is perception being reality for most of us. And this kind of dovetails on the first topic a little bit, but it might go a little bit different direction. Perception being reality for most of us. And one of the things that I see where leaders fail, and again, it tends to be the older generation of leaders, the Gen X's, the baby boomers. Perception being reality for most people is just that. It's their reality. Even if it's a misinformed perception, even if it's not fact-based, or it's, even in some cases a made-up perception, it is still the perception of that individual that holds it. And so we can't necessarily just discredit that or discount it and move on. We have to understand why they're feeling that way. And when it comes specifically to the workplace, if somebody's perception is that they're not being treated fairly every day, or that they're not set up for success in many cases, that's their perception and that is their reality. And even if they don't have anything solid to base it on, as a leader of that individual, I have to at least try to understand how they got there and how they're feeling that way, because I can't correct the problem if I just discard it, say, oh, that person's misinformed. Everybody's equal here. That's not going on. If we don't take time to try to understand their point of view, we're never going to build that comfort level with them, and we're never going to be able to manage that relationship well. And again, the example that I give is somebody who's uncomfortable at work, but also look at the profession you're in. If you're a law enforcement officer like myself, if there are certain demographics out there where their perception is that we're just going out there and violating people's rights, and there's no legality or science behind what we're doing on a daily basis, that's their perception. And that for them, that's their reality. Even though most of us know that the statistics don't necessarily show that, if that's the perception of a few or of many, we have to work on that. We have to be able to change that. We can't just discount that or say, they're just misinformed, whatever. We have to be the ones out there that are changing that narrative. And it's the same thing in any other line of work, in politics, in the corporate world, in the medical industry. If there's a perception out there that our profession is struggling to get things right, we have to either A, start getting things right more frequently, or B, start working on that perception. Start interacting with people and trying to educate them to try to change that perception, because the perception is the reality. And if it's a negative one, we need to change it to make it a positive perception, because then that becomes the positive becomes the reality for most. So food for thought on that, perception being reality, and always making sure that you're taking those things into consideration when you're dealing with people around you. If you have stories or experiences on that, standardprotocolpodcast@gmail.com. Now, the third topic I wanted to cover today is part of being a leader is understanding and explaining the why of things. Why do we do things? Why are things the way they are? What's important about what we're doing on a daily basis? Being a leader is all about being able to understand that and then explain it or articulate it in a manner that others can understand it. That is what leadership is all about. And we always hear that the Gen Zs and the Millennials are more inclined to question why. And to a certain extent, I think that is true, but it's not necessarily, in my experiences, it's not necessarily because they're challenging the authorities of leadership or of the previous generation. They just want to understand the value in something. They want to feel valued, and they want to know that their job that they're doing every day is a valued position. And so the example that I always use is if you're an assembly line worker on say the Ford Motor Company, and your job and your step in that process as the truck comes down the assembly line is to put the wheels on and tighten the lug nuts down to a certain spec. And that's your step in the process. Each tire goes on, 6 lug nuts, tightened down to a certain spec. It rolls off the line. And then the next person does, whatever their step in the process is. If you're a good employee and you're given that directive every day, grab the wheel, put it on the truck, tighten the lug nuts down, send it on the line, send it down the line. If that's your step in the process and you're a good order taker, you're a good rules follower, you're going to do that all day long because somebody told you to, and that's your job. That's what you're getting paid to do there every day. But if you're the kind of person that needs to feel value in what you do, leadership should be taking you aside day one and explaining the value in that step in the process. That's not just a step in the overall assembly line process of putting a truck together. There's a lot more riding on it than that, because what's going to happen is somebody's going to pay $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 for that truck, which is a pretty good chunk of change. They're going to buy it. They're going to drive it off the lot. They're going to put their family in it. They're going to go down the highway or the interstate at 70 miles an hour. And if one of those lug nuts or one of those bolts fails and that wheel comes off that truck, that could be very devastating to the consumer and their family in that vehicle, as well as everybody else on the road around them. It's a big safety issue, and there's a lot riding on your step in that process. And if you take the time to explain that to the individual that's actually doing that job, they're going to take pride in that job because they feel valued. They feel like they are a valued step in that process, and there's a lot riding on their work every day. They're going to take the job more seriously. They're going to feel more pride. Every time they see one of those trucks go down the road, they're going to say, hey, that's one that I put the wheels on, and I know it's safe because I did it right, because I do it every day, and I take pride in my job. But if you're the type of leader where you just bark out the order and expect it to be followed, yeah, you may get employees to do that, but they're not going to take pride in it. They're not going to feel value in it. They're just executing a task because you gave it to them, and they're doing it for a paycheck and not for the pride of the job. So if you find yourself in a leadership role, always take that time to explain the why factor to your employees, because that is what's going to get them to follow you. The old saying is that people follow managers because they want to, not because they have to. And that's very true. You can go get a job anywhere and have a mediocre manager. There's plenty of those out there. But people will follow you because they want to if you take the time to make them feel valued and you take the time to explain the why in things. Why do we do something a certain way? What is the importance in it? And why do we need you to take pride in your job and how you do it every day? That is my leadership tip of the week for explaining the why of things. And again, it goes over extremely well with Millennials and Gen Zs because they want to feel valued. They want to know that their step in the process is just as important as any other step. And if you take the time to explain why, they'll understand it, they'll take pride, they'll do it well for you. All right, moving on to my final topic of the day. This is the feedback part, where again, like I said earlier, we need your feedback to be able to make this show go. So standardprotocolpodcast@gmail.com. Reach out to us with your feedback on the first 2 episodes. This episode, if you've made it this far, let us know where we're failing, where we're doing well, if you can relate to anything that we've put out there so far. And if there's other future topics that you'd like to see us cover, let us know. Send us those. Send those our way. I do have one email here that I wanted to get on the air, and this one comes from Stephanie. Back on episode 1, we talked about information sharing, where leaders good leaders tend to share all the information they have with their team and with the people around them to try to bring the performance of the team upward, whereas bad leaders, or what I call your baseline managers, they will tend to hoard all of that information and not give it out because they don't want people threatening them or knowing as much as they do, and they don't want to feel threatened by a team that's functioning well. They want to be the top dog, and they want to remain in command and in control of all that information. So Stephanie here brought up a very good point. I believe that in the world, corporate, government, etc., people, leaders especially, are operating with a belief of scarcity, of there is not enough and I need to claim things for myself, thus making people less likely to share information or to be transparent because they want to rise to the top and give themselves the upper hand. That is a very solid point. It's kind of the dog eat dog world out there that a lot of corporate environments, and especially if you work in an area like sales or just any high drive, low drag area where there is pressure to outperform everyone else. And there are bonuses and there are things that make that information sharing prohibitive. And so that is a very good point, Stephanie. I appreciate you bringing that to our attention. And that might be the difference between my environment, where if you've tuned into the show before, you know that I'm a career law enforcement professional. Although I did a brief stint in the corporate world and didn't necessarily care for it. That might be the difference between a government environment and a more corporate setting where there is a lot of pressure to perform and a lot of pressure to be the best. And if you're sharing that information with people around you, they may outperform you, and that may become an issue. So that is a very sound point. I hadn't necessarily thought of it in those terms, but you're right, Stephanie. Appreciate you bringing that to our attention. And I think that there are ways that we can bring each other to the top, even in those competitive environments, and not necessarily worry about being knocked down off the totem pole or knocked down a notch or two on the company ladder. But I do think that the teams that I have worked with where they have functioned impeccably well, those are the teams that are subject matter experts in every area. If you have somebody, if look at it from a corporate perspective, we got a guy that's exceptional at sales. We got a guy that's exceptional at marketing. We got a guy that's exceptional at research and development. Those are the type of companies that perform impeccably well. And in a small business environment where your team may be 15 to 20 people, you may only have 2 subject matter experts in marketing, but they're driving the rest of the team there to function at a high level by way of helping the salespeople, helping the customer service people, helping the tech support, whatever environment you're in. You have those subject matter experts in all of those areas that are overlapping and helping each other, and those are the teams that tend to perform well. But I do agree where if you are in an area where there's a high pressure for individualized performance, whether it be sales or something else, that can hamper that information sharing. So that's a very good point. I'm going to have to give that some more thought and maybe revisit that on a later episode. So we appreciate our first email from Stephanie in Omaha. But anybody else, if you've got any feedback for the show, it's always much appreciated. And ultimately, if we don't have some feedback or we don't have some people giving us some topics of conversation, we're not going to have as much content on the show in future episodes here. We do plan on bringing some guests in future episodes and having just overall leadership and life discussions. And I think you'll find that to be very productive and very informative. So please stay tuned to future episodes. In the meantime, shoot us an email, standardprotocolpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you, everyone. Have a great week and be safe out there.